it comes to the Anglican or the English expression of liturgy, I've in the Catholic Church, they have the Anglican Ordinariate, and they've gone forward in trying to offer that to a lot of people who have a specific allegiance to the English expression of liturgy. I'm curious if you know anything about that, how you feel about it. In what way is the unique English kind of expression of liturgy unique, and what is kind of the beauty there? What is there to preserve?
That's a good question. I love that liturgy. If you watch any of my mass streams, you'll notice 9 times out of 10 we're using the Divine Worship Missal. It is the Ordinariate use liturgy. It's beautiful. I think it's the most beautiful English liturgy because it's preserved ancient tradition. And so all it is the traditional Latin Mass translated into English, but with actually, nice reverential English, not that modern rubbish that the Novus Ordo uses. It's more of a early modern English, and also keeping snippets of what were in the Sarum use. And so the reason it's important for us Englishmen is because, well, the whole church has always had local customs. There are like 24 or 25 rites in the Latin, well, in the Western Church, right? And people think there's just the extraordinary form and the ordinary form. Like that's not it. That's one use. There are 24 or 25 uses. And so everyone's had their own traditions. Every culture has had a tradition or an expression of the Catholic faith. In England, we had a few. We had one up in York, and we had one up in Salisbury. The most famous one is called the Sarum use, and it was beautiful. And this is before they were all, it was around the time of the Reformation that everything got kind of standardized into the TLM, as we call it now. But prior to that, the Mass was always in Latin, but it was always, there were different expressions of it, okay, according to local custom. And so in England, we kept a lot of that. And then because of the Reformation, much of it was put into the Book of Common Prayer. And that's managed to hold on to it because whilst the European continent mostly remained in communion with Rome and therefore went through the liturgical reforms of the 1960s, which just threw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think that they were probably more Protestant than the Protestant Reformation. So whilst on the continent, the Mass was diminished, and I'm not saying it's not still the Mass is the Mass, but the Novus Ordo is far less reverent, generally speaking, and ditched a lot of important liturgy and elements of the liturgy, whereas the traditional Latin Mass doesn't. And so that's been suppressed, and people are looking around at their different flavors. The Ordinariate, because they weren't a liturgical group, managed to hold on to much of those treasures. And so that missal is for me, that's what the ordinary form should be, rather than the / kind of post 1960s thing that most people have to adhere to. It holds on to what has always been known to be true, what's always been known to be beautiful, what's always been known to be good. And that's the job of the church. That's the job of sacred tradition, to hold on to truth rather than just to innovate and be novel. We shouldn't be innovating. We shouldn't be novel. Those are anti-Catholic sentiments. But that's the missal side. But on a practical side, in England, in high churches, we held on to things that much of the continent did away with. So rood screens are a good example. Altar rails are another one. Not having girls as altar servers, not having Nanny Sue as extraordinary Eucharistic ministers. Lots of these reforms that came in on the continent didn't happen in the same way in high churches in England. And so that expression is very traditional. Some of it is within communion with Rome. There's an Ordinariate church in the middle of London that is a very beautiful church, but most of it is outside of communion with Rome at the moment because of the situation with the Reformation in England and Henry VIII wanting his annulment and all that stuff. But that wasn't down to the people. So the people held on to their tradition as best they could. And I'm hoping that helps, actually. England has a lot to give to the church.
Because America is so Anglo, we almost don't even view the English as a separate, ethnic group that would have their own expressions, because a lot of what is English is just what is American from a cultural perspective. So I think it's really interesting to kind of go and see the way the English have kind of preserved their heritage in that way.
Yeah, and people are welcome to come to my church, St. Paul's, Grand Rapids, and see it in person. They'll see a very reverential mass that looks identical to the Latin mass, the traditional Latin mass, but in the vernacular. And again, there's no reason that that's not what the vernacular mass could have been, rather than just, it wasn't just a translation, it was a stripping apart. And people with bad intentions used the translation process to have their way with the liturgy, where they should never have been allowed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. And there's so much, I mean, there literally are dozens of novels and books written on the subversion that happened. And even, I mean, you don't even have to necessarily believe that there was explicit subversion just to understand the reality that the product that came out in 1969 is just not as impressive, not as reverent, not as respectful as what had existed before. I don't think you have to you don't even need to buy into a conspiracy theory to acknowledge the differences that exist.